Good morning, students. Today's discussion will be on basic statistical tools which can be used to analyze data and for drawing interpretations from them. So these are the contents of this particular presentation. We'll be talking about measurement and scaling. We'll be talking about measures of central tendency, measures of dispersion, correlation and regression. Today I will be focusing on these two, measurement and scaling, and measures of central tendency. And then in the next lecture we'll talk about measures of dispersion, correlation and regression. Coming to measurement and scaling. Whenever a particular researcher starts research, the very first question which arises in the minds of the researcher is what is to be measured. Obviously, what is to be measured will be based upon what is the research problem. Once the problem has been identified, then the data collection steps comes in, for which the researcher might design a questionnaire or might conduct an interview. And then what sort of questions will be asked, that will depend upon what the researcher wants to measure. So measurement basically means the researcher or the person is trying to assign numbers or some symbols to characteristics of objects as per certain standardized guidelines. Now say for example, the researcher or an educational institution, say for example, wants to assess the performance of their faculty. Now the variable which needs to be measured is performance of faculty. There could be various characteristics which could define this performance. That could be based on number one, the passing percentage of the students. Secondly, the response of faculty evaluation could be based upon the students' feedback, whether they are satisfied with the faculty or not. Then the faculty assessment could also be based upon what reviews are given by their coordinators, by their superiors. So for assessing faculty performance, there are various criteria which, or you can call them as attributes, which need to be measured. Now the question is how to measure them. Say for example, if we want to measure the weight, we have standard denomination that we represent the weight of an object or weight of a human being in terms of kgs or in terms of grams. So for certain items, measurement is very easy because numbers can be easily assigned and there are standardized protocols which can actually measure the object. Say for example, marks, the weight, height. But what about the satisfaction level? How to measure it? That is a problem. So for that, there are various types of scales which we need to learn so that accordingly we can devise our questionnaire in a proper way. So measurement means assigning numbers or other symbols to characteristics of objects, and scaling means we are trying to create a spectrum of all the possibilities, and all those possibilities we will be trying to measure them by giving them appropriate numbers. Say for example, a researcher wants to know about apple. He goes to the market and buys apple. So the apples, and then he goes on observing the apple. What observations could be drawn by the researcher? Number one, the researcher may look at the color of the apple. The apples could be green in color, the apples could be red in color. So the researcher may note down his or her observation. Secondly, say for example, the researcher have purchased 5 kgs of apples and every apple will not weigh equally. So he or she may be interested to know what is the weight of every single apple. Then every apple may not taste same. Some apples may be very sweet, others may be very sour, or they could be rotten. So he wants to know what is the taste of the apple. So he is looking for color, he is looking for the taste, he is looking for the weight of the apple, and he may also observe if there is a sticker placed on the apple which tells what is the date of harvesting that apple. So these observations could be many. So the Object is one, apple, but various characteristics of that object needs to be measured. Now, the color is described in a standard form as red or green, as the researcher can visualize from the eyes. With regards to the weight, it will be in the form of grams. Again, a standardized rule or a method to measure the weight of the apple. Then, what about the sweetness? For that, the researcher has to cut the apple and taste it. So, there cannot be any numerical or a number attached to it. How you can say that apple sweet is the value number 5 and the apple which is less sweet, you can give it a number 3. So, there comes your concept of scaling. We need to understand the concept of scaling, how a particular characteristic can be measured. Right? So let us move next. So there are 4 types of scales: nominal scale, ordinal scale, interval scale and ratio scale. So nominal scale, very simple scale, very lower level of scale, and in this scale numbers are assigned to identify the objects. So there cannot be any calculation on that number. Say for example, there is a cricket match and there are players on both the sides. So every player jersey will have a number. Every player has a name. Why everybody is given a name? So that we can assign or we can identify that particular player, and we get to know that one player is different from the other player. Similarly, if I say for the apples example, red apple and green apple. So this question, the color of the apple is actually measured on a nominal scale. It tells you the apple is either red in color or it is green in color. And red color and green color are two different things. Secondly, ordinal. Ordinal is connected with the order. So wherein we are trying to, in a race, here the example which is given to you is of race. So in the first nominal scale, numbers are assigned to various participants. In second, the racers are arranged in order as per their position. So first position, second position, third position. So ordinal means which is associated with a particular order. So this particular scale will tell us whether one racer possesses more of a characteristic or less of a characteristic. So if I talk about the apples example, this could be the taste of the apple. One apple which has a very sweet taste could be placed first in the order, followed by the second apple which is less sweeter, and third apple which is even less sweeter. So ordinal means where we are connected with certain particular order. Third comes is your interval scale. In interval scale, the researcher tries to rate the performance. So if the audience is given a rating scale from 0 to 10 and the runners are rated on that scale. So here we see that we can see the difference. So that is your interval scale. Next is your ratio scale, where the characteristic which is measured is time to finish in seconds. So for completing that race, what time was taken by the participant. So coming to your nominal scale, they are only labels or they are only tags, and they are used to identify or classify objects, and they do not reflect the amount of characteristic possessed by the object. The only operation which could be done on the nominal scale is counting. So if I talk about the number of participants in a race, right? So counting I am doing because I'll get the name list of the participants and I'll count ultimately how many participants participated in that particular race. In case of apples, I may count what are the number of red apples and what is the number of green apples. So this particular scales allows only equal to and not equal to comparison, which means that red apple is not equal to green apple. Right? So only statistical thing which could be performed, or only operation which could be performed, is equal to and not equal to. So red apple is obviously not equal to green apple. If I denote red apple by 1 and green apple by 2, if I assign numbers, see, measurement means assigning numbers. So I denote red apple by 1 and green apple by 2. So we will say 1 is not equal to 2 because 1 represents red apple and 2 represents green apple. I cannot do a statistical operation of 1 plus 2 or 1 minus 2 because the only possibility on the questions which are asked on a nominal scale is counting. So I may count how many ones, I may count how many twos, right? Second scale which comes is ordinal scale. Ordinal scale is associated with the order. Order says when we arrange something in order, that means the item which comes first in the order possesses more of a characteristic, and the items which come later in the order may possess less of a characteristic. So when I arrange the apples on the basis of their taste, right, and I assign numbers, say for example, the apples which are extremely sweet, I give them number of 5, right? The apples which are less sweet, I give them number of 4, and so on. So what kind of operations we can do equal to and not equal to? Obviously, the less sweeter apples are different from the more sweeter apples, and greater to and equal to comparison. Why greater to and equal to comparison? Because one of the apple is more sweeter, so it possesses more of the characteristic. What is the characteristic? Sweetness, right? So here in the questions which are asked on ordinal scale, we can perform obviously the counting as well as we can perform median, quartile or percentiles. Third type of scale which comes is interval scale. Now interval scale helps you to compare the difference between objects, right? So in case of the apples, if I get to know the date of harvesting, supposingly first apple was harvested on April 1, second apple was harvested on April 4, third apple was harvested on April 8. Now I can locate the difference. First apple April 1 harvesting, second apple April 4 harvesting. So what is the difference? 3 days, right? So in data which is asked on interval scale, obviously is equal to and non is equal to comparison, greater than and less than, because I can arrange in order. The apples which are harvested earlier could be placed earlier, and the apples which are harvested later could be placed later in the order. So equal to and less than and greater than comparison, plus and minus comparison. Why plus and minus comparison? Because I can note down the difference between two dates of harvest, right? So in this particular scale, the statistical techniques which can be applied are arithmetic mean, standard deviation, right? Okay, then last, ratio scale. Ratio scale is the higher order scale, and it possesses all the properties of previous three scales. Previous three: nominal, ordinal and interval scale, right? And in ratio scale, we can calculate the ratios. Say for example, in case of apples, if the weight of the apples is measured, so that is the data which is asked on a ratio scale. Now I can find out the ratio. I can take weight of one apple in the numerator and I can take weight of another apple in the denominator, right? Because it will be in your grams or kgs. So on ratio scale, you can perform is equal to and non is equal to comparison, right? Greater than and less than comparisons, plus and minus comparison, because you can subtract and add the weights, division and multiplication comparisons, because when you are dividing, what you are doing, you are taking the ratio. So ratio scale is the higher order scale, and on this particular scale, all the statistical techniques can be applied.